I'm sure you will have followed it by now. Lots of controversy, lots of debate, lots of conversation. She's had the Labour whip basically withdrawn due to remarks that she wrote in a letter, a draft letter, everybody, to the Observer newspaper. Right, just to give you a bit of context in case you're not really following what's been going on, there was an article written in the Observer. And it was all about this study, this survey, basically, the Evidence for Equality National Survey. And what it was saying, long story short, is that a whole host of people feel like they experience like racial discrimination. And it was things like the travelling community, Jewish people. It was just a whole variety of people. Anyway, Diane Abbott wrote back, and that was the letter that was just been on your screen, if I can just get that back on the screen. But what she's basically saying is that, yes, fair enough, Irish, Jewish, traveller people suffer from prejudice. She says the two words, racism and prejudice, are used interchangeably. And she basically goes on to say that, yes, white people can experience prejudice, for example, if you've got a red hair, but you don't live your life, apparently, subject to racism. And then she starts going on about pre-civil rights movements in America and all the rest of it. That she talks about slavery and there being no white people, basically, as slaves. Anyway, the essence of this, what I found quite interesting, I'll start with you, Joe, on this, is to me, I felt that there was this suggestion that white people basically cannot be victims of racism made by Diane Abbott. Do you agree with that sentiment?
No, and I think Diane Abbott, who has achieved a lot, she's been an MP for 36 years, she was the first black woman to be elected an MP, but bearing in mind all of that, she is completely tone deaf if she can even think in some convoluted way that she can compare the racism and the suffering of the Jewish race to people with ginger hair. Now, you know, it may well be that what she's trying to say is something else. But as you alluded to there, Michelle, she brought in civil rights, and her point was that, you know, you weren't asked to sit at the back of the bus if you had got white skin, even if you were of a different race. But that's missing the point. This was an article about what was happening in this country now, today, and she then made it slightly worse, even worse, actually, by her apology saying that she'd sent, or the draft had been sent by mistake, not she had sent it. Which begs the question, did she actually write this, or was it some assistant that wrote it? And as you said, the whip's been withdrawn, and I think that is very decisive of Keir Starmer, and it's the right thing to do. And she has apologised, we should say.
Yeah, I don't think she was suggesting that someone else sent it in or whatever. She says, I'm writing regarding my letter that was recently published in The Observer. I wish to wholly and unreservedly withdraw my remarks and disassociate myself from them. The errors arose in an initial draft being sent, but there is no excuse, and I wish to apologise for any anguish caused. Then it goes on from there. I wish to disassociate myself from getting Dominique's name wrong. 2 minutes ago.
There's an audience.
That's what I mean. It doesn't quite work like that, doesn't it?
No.
I don't get to disassociate myself from something I literally said a few moments ago.
Yeah, and those are her opinions, to be honest, because they're very common opinions.
Do you think she's racist, Diane Abbott?
I'm not going to comment on whether she personally harbours hatred towards people of a different race, but I think that...
Why? Why wouldn't you have a view on that?
Because I don't know her personally, and she's not said anything that would suggest she genuinely harbours hatred for other people. However, she is part of a culture that we're seeing today, whether knowingly or unknowingly, of perpetuating this idea that white people can't experience racism. And I've said this many times, that white people can experience racism because if you actually look at what the definition of racism is, it's the belief that other races have characteristics or features that render them superior or inferior. And, you know, whether you're black or white, you can have those views of different races. And we've seen white people experience racism, we've seen Jewish people experience horrific racism, and travellers can experience it as well. And what that actually does, whether she intends to do this or not, is it does perpetuate anti-white sentiment because it says that white people aren't deserving of the same level of compassion as black people, and I think that's completely wrong. And what it actually does is, I feel like it deliberately stokes up division, but it deliberately stokes up this idea within black people that no other race has experienced anything comparable, so therefore we must be given special treatment. And whilst I understand that the transatlantic slave trade is a very unique thing, that doesn't mean that other races can't experience racism. And we saw that in the survey itself, where Roma gypsies are even more likely than Jewish people to say they'd experienced racial assault or insults, and I think that's really quite interesting as well. So it's not just a black versus white thing.
And as you say, Dominique, I mean, this is Islamophobia. There's all sorts of attitudes to different people that are racist. I can't think what she thought she would achieve by doing this. And it strikes me that, one assumes she is a bright woman. I have met her and I have worked alongside her. And she certainly tells you she's a bright woman, and she certainly wanted to be Labour Home Secretary.
What do you mean she tells you that she's a bright woman?
Well,
I was wondering, I was thinking that as well.
She doesn't walk around saying, I'm a bright woman, surely.
She tells you a lot about how she got to Cambridge.
Well, right.
And so did Dominic Raab, so that doesn't prove anything, does it, really?
Yeah.
But I just think, why, when you've achieved such a lot, blow it on something that she must be so well aware of? And it's not the first time that she's made these sort of blunders and had to apologise. You remember she got muddled up with the number of police officer's salary or something like that on a radio phone in.
It was a bit of both, wasn't it? It was on Nick Ferrari, if I remember correctly, where she was saying, we're going to put these police officers at this much, and when you broke it down, per person, it was very little money.
And she also said, some years ago that only West Indian mothers cared enough about their children to send them to private school, and she's a little bit chaotic, let's say, and she should be much more disciplined to be this senior and this experienced.
But she can't be disciplined when this is what she genuinely believes. I mean, I've personally heard it so many times from other black people, to be honest, that white people can't experience racism. This is a common belief. So the reality is, when she wrote that letter, she wasn't aware of anything that she said that was wrong. I think that's just the truth of it.
One of the things that I found quite interesting is, so the original comment, the original piece that was published, this was all about this survey that had been conducted in the UK. It was all about UK citizens' experience of life within the UK. So that's what she was actually responding to. And what I found really interesting, Dominique, was that what she'd done in her kind of rebuttal to that, so in order to deny the experience of UK citizens, she'd brought in these experiences from completely different countries.
Yeah.
So whether it's your likes of America, whether it's your likes of South Africa. And I do find it fascinating how many people, they do seem to be quite keen to take the problems, the flaws of particularly countries like America and pick them up and put them into the UK and act as though the UK is a mirror image of the challenges within, say, America.
Yeah.
Why do people do that?
I mean, it's just conflating the two, but it's easy to, because sort of the black struggle in a way it really comes from America. That's where the activism comes from. That's where a lot of the extreme opinions come from. And, yes, England, Britain has had and has a history with racism. In America, it was very specific, where, you couldn't marry someone of a different race, you couldn't vote, you had to sit at the back of the bus, like she said. There was a civil war to actually keep slavery. Meanwhile, Britain was abolishing it. And I think it is really dangerous to conflate those two distinct histories, because it brings sort of the grievance together, and it makes it hard to separate the two in a way that I think is historically inaccurate. Because when she said that white people have never experienced slavery. I mean, that's just not true, is it?
Yeah, factually, historically inaccurate. It's just so divisive as well.
It's so divisive, and I think, what remains to be seen is whether she will actually stand at the next election.
Do you think she should?
Well, I think that's a matter for the Labour Party and her constituents in Hackney. I don't think it's easy to call for somebody's resignation. I don't think it actually means anything. What will happen now? There will be an investigation. She's apologised. She's had the whip withdrawn. If the whip is restored, then theoretically she can stand as Labour candidate in Hackney. If she doesn't get the whip restored, then she finds herself in the same position as her very close ally, Jeremy Corbyn. Would she stand as an independent against a Labour candidate?
And this is the thing, I do believe that it should be up to her constituents to decide
Absolutely.
this. However, I take issue with Keir Starmer's sort of attitude with this, because it's clearly politically motivated. There is a legacy of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. It's what a lot of people are focused on. He's really thrown the hammer on Jeremy Corbyn and basically wiped out his career as an MP, despite the fact that Keir Starmer himself was part of the Labour shadow government when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. I mean, he campaigned to make this man Prime Minister. Diane Abbott was in the shadow cabinet as well. I just struggled to believe that, this is genuine outrage and his response is genuine when he was part of a shadow government when all of these issues with anti-Semitism was going on. I think it really is a play to gain public favour for the next election, genuinely.
Well, I'll throw it open to you at home as well. What do you think to that? Final point.
Well, I think that's slightly unfair, because I think, the allegations of anti-Semitism were robust and were certainly going round from people like Margaret Hodge, for instance, also another, hugely respected Labour MP. But I think it was only when Keir Starmer took over as leader of the party that anything was actually done about it. And he has been absolutely, clear. There is no place for anti-Semitism within the Labour Party that he leads.
Well, what do you think of it all?